Welcome to Real Talk, a podcast by First United Methodist Church Pearland, where we have real conversations about faith, doubt, and everything in between with real people. I'm your host, Pastor Thea, and I'm so glad that you've tuned in today as we continue to strive to talk about real topics that affect us both in the church and beyond. And today I'm joined by Vickie Kloeris, one of our members at First United Methodist Church Pearland. Vickie, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us why you said yes to coming on the podcast today.
Well, first I'll tell you that my husband and I joined FUMC Pearland shortly after we moved to Pearland. And so we've been attending there since probably 87, so quite a while. Yeah. My background is, I'm a retired NASA employee, but my background is in food microbiology. And I managed the food system for the shuttle and the space station for 29 years at NASA. And so you wanted to talk about food? Yeah. Food, especially food microbiology, is my expertise. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, as we were planning for this season, I wanted to talk about things that people might be interested in, both in and outside the church. And so this idea of holy health and what is our belief about God, how does that affect our beliefs about food and our behavior with food? And when we just got to talking one day and kind of dug a little deeper into your background, I thought, well, Vickie, would you be willing to come and share what you have learned and experienced from a scientific background? And, I'll offer what I've seen just as a non-scientist in the world, and how much my relationship with food has changed through my relationship with God as well. And so, we'll just jump into it. It's the new year. People are trying to eat healthy, get right. And I think the more we are intentional with what we actually think and believe about food and about health, then the better will be. So let's just start with that. What does it mean to be healthy, and how is food involved in that whole concept?
Well, healthy is kind of a broad term because, it can cover physical health, mental health, spiritual health. Food is inherent in physical health, especially, and it can be in mental health as well, because depending on your relationship with food and how it affects your body, it can affect your mental attitudes toward yourself and your self-image. And so, that makes it important as well.
Yeah, I would firmly agree that what you eat not only affects you physically, but definitely mentally, and even for me, emotionally. So I strive really hard to have a sugar-free diet. And that doesn't mean I eat foods that are labeled sugar-free, because that actually, in my opinion, has the worst sugars in it, has the man-made or synthetic sugars, but really try to live without eating any type of processed sugar. So I do eat honey or fruit, but I try to stay away from white sugar and or synthetic sugar, primarily because of how it affects me emotionally. I've noticed that it will give me extreme lows. It'll give me headaches, and I then become mentally obsessed with wanting to get more sugar. Like I feel that addiction where all I want is to get more sugar.
That's interesting.
And several years ago, I just felt this like, you know what? Jesus has something better for me. Just has something for my mind to worry about instead of how can I get more sugar? And by the way, it's super easy to get sugar. It's everywhere in everything. And so I definitely can see how it affects your mental. And like I said, for me, emotional. It wasn't just the obsession, but like I said, I would have these extreme lows where I would feel depressed. I would feel lethargic. I, would have a lack of hope. And I'd be like, it's because I ate cheesecake 3 days ago. This is ridiculous, and had to really start to strive to get that out of my diet just so I didn't feel that way.
Well, and I think part of the problem is everybody's different. Their reactions are going to be different. How they respond to certain types of food, it's gonna be different. There is you can't really say one size fits all. And so, you really have, as a person, have to find out what works for you from a health perspective and a psychological perspective. But definitely, I'm a big believer in all things in moderation, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think the hard thing with food and getting healthy and figuring out that relationship is because it isn't something like sugar and or alcohol where you can just say none, zero.
Right.
We have to eat.
Yeah. You have to eat. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a beautiful gift that
Yeah.
God gave us an appetite and this wonderful creation full of delicious foods and how much warmth and love and shared experiences go through sharing a meal together. Like, I think it's a powerful tool.
Yeah.
And yet it can also lead you to want to eat chips every single day, like, or whatever,
Yeah.
it can also lead to these things. So I also find myself really striving toward that balance, striving toward that moderation, because you got to eat.
Right.
It's essential.
Yes.
And it's good. And it's good for you, right? We don't want to like X this thing out. I don't want to just take a pill that gives me everything.
Yeah.
I want to eat.
And I think you also, just from my experience with working with the astronauts, you also have to, I mean, it's important for moderation, but I think you also have to make exceptions at times because of the psychological impact. Because I know when I started out with the program, we were doing all shuttle missions. They were very short. Very few people cared about food. It's like, it's a camping trip. I'm sure I can find something. But as soon as we transitioned to long duration space flight, the whole attitude changed.
Yeah.
I can remember the first shuttle, folks who had flown on the shuttle, when we were planning for the International Space Station, NASA sent shuttle crew members to stay on the Mir, which was the Russian space station that was up at the time, because they wanted to get them experience in long duration space flight. And those folks were staying, I believe at that time, about 4 months at a time on Mir. And the first crew members who went, originally the plan was there was going to be no NASA space food on board. They were going to eat the Russian provided food. But the astronaut office was like, oh no, we have to have some of the NASA provided food. So we got to send a small amount. And so I can remember going to some of those first crew members saying, what do you want us to send? We can't send a bunch. What do you want us to send? And the response that I got was, well, I'm busy learning Russian and I'm learning the logistics on Mir and how to operate the equipment. So I don't have time to worry about food. Just go back to my shuttle menu and pick something that I had selected for my shuttle flight. So that's what we did. But then when crew members came back from Mir, they were like, I should have paid more attention. Food became a lot more important when they were up there for months at a time. Yeah.
Yes.
And so that was a big turning point, because from then on, word had got around the astronaut office pretty quick. If you're up long duration, you need to be paying attention to what food you're taking and what you like and, that kind of stuff, because it's one of the few creature comforts that they have when they're up there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can even just think about, I do a quarterly pastoral leadership retreat. And it's at Camp Allen, which is great. And they do a really good job of providing the best food that they can to large masses.
Right.
But I know that is a piece of also why I'm a little over emotional at those things, and I come home very, very tired because I haven't been fueled the way that my body needs. Same thing, working at a church, food is everyone's love language, and they love to bring all sorts of delicious comfort food that I know was baked and cooked with so much love. But if I eat that, I will be nothing but tired, nothing but exhausted. I will, again, have emotional downs. And so I, have to say no as long as possible, because I know that even good, wholesome food, if it's not what my body needs, I'm going to be lacking, and it is going to affect me mentally.
Yes.
That clarity and that ability to focus and that ability to do what I can do. And so it makes me even just kind of wonder, like, again, God provided us with this nourishment that we need, because God knows how our body works too, right? And that leads me to ask, like, what about learning about food and learning about, especially the like microbiology about it? Like, how has that impacted your understanding of God, and or how has God impacted your understanding of what's going on with food?
Well, I mean, the best example I can think of is the food laws that God put in place for the Jews as part of the Jewish religion. And those were in place not because there was anything inherently wrong with pork, but because of health reasons. Because, undercooked pork, you can get trichinosis, which can be a lifetime issue. And so there's from a food safety perspective, that's the reason for most of those laws to protect them, because there was no FDA and USDA and good manufacturing practices back then. These people were slaughtering their own animals, doing their own cooking. They didn't have electronic meat thermometers like we have now to be sure that they were cooking it to the right temperature. So, yeah, I mean, those laws were put in place by God because he knew, he wanted to protect the health of his people. Yeah.
Yeah. And what a gift.
Yeah.
That God would provide that provision. I mean, that's something that I do greatly get out of the Old Testament, is this provision, right? This presence of God and the provision of God. Even I started the new year by reading Genesis 1, and it's just, look, Thea, I've provided everything for you. That's what I felt like God was saying as I reread that chapter of just like, everything you need, I've given it to you. Why do you worry? Why do you worry so much?
Yeah.
Giving you everything. And when I started my CrossFit journey, which is about 10 years ago, I started getting into eating real food. And before that, I was already trying to get away from packages and trying to start to eat better, just looking at my family of history and saying, I got to do something because the genetics are not in my favor.
Yeah.
So I got to do something. And it was at that time that I just felt like God was like, hey, trust me and not Kraft. I'm not saying these organizations are evil. I'm not saying they're out to get you, but why don't you look around the things that I've already provided for you and maybe worry less about buying things in boxes, because I've given you everything you need. And isn't that one of the theories? If you want to lose weight, just shop on the outside of the grocery store. Don't go down the aisle. That's where the snacks are, the cookies, the crackers, all the processed things. Stay on the outside. Eat whole fruits and vegetables, lean meats, dairy, eggs, even milk. But don't be getting in the middle. That's where you get into trouble.
I have to defend processed foods to a certain extent.
Okay.
Because if it weren't for food processing, our diets would be so limited. Because what we have available, the quantity and the variety that we have available in the grocery store you would be limited to what can be grown locally. There are nutrients that you are able to get where you live that you would not be able to get if it weren't in a processed form. So there is a place for processed food. Yes, it can be overdone. Yeah, definitely. But it provides the ability to have crops or particular items that you would not be able to have if you were strictly looking at fresh grown, what could be grown locally.
Sure.
Because like when we started working with the Russians, their diet was so different because, think of the climate compared to what we have here and what we can grow. It was all potatoes for them, pretty much. Potatoes, onions, stuff that could be grown cold, and they didn't eat vegetables, standalone vegetables. I can remember when we did food sessions for them, and they were going to fly on the shuttle, they would come in and try the products, and I can remember passing something like a package of green beans, and the first folks, they wouldn't even try it because it's like they don't do standalone vegetables. They do casseroles, they do soups that have the vegetables in them, but they weren't familiar with a side of green beans or a side of broccoli, or that's just not something they were familiar with.
Yeah.
So, depending on your region where you live and the climate where you live, it can affect availability. And so that's why processed foods do have a place, and extending shelf life too,
Sure.
being able to have products year round that you wouldn't be able normally to have year round. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and let me tell you, I think HEB is the best thing in the entire world. I don't ever want my own farm. I love being able to get everything
Right.
from HEB, including I quit making guacamole on my own because HEB does a great job, and I can just pick it up for $4.39. And same thing with cakes. I don't bake cakes; I get one from HEB. They're delicious. They're so good, And so, don't get me wrong. And I buy those cakes for other people because I don't eat them, but. I do. Yeah, I totally see that. And I would also say this gift that God, you mentioned moderation, that God gives us that moderation too. Mm-hmm. That God would be like, yes, I've given you everything. And when you take all those ingredients and you put them together, it's a delicious chocolate lava cake. Yes. Mm-hmm. And you deserve that. And you enjoy that. Probably if you eat it every day, you're going to get sick. But if you also have this room to, like you said, kind of enjoy that and take it in. And then also, like you said too, we can here in Pearland, we can taste things that don't grow here, which I don't know if any food grows in Pearland, but we can taste these foods, we can enjoy them, and we can have both an enriching experience, with our taste buds and again, with our bodies to absorb the nutrients in our brains, but then also with people, right? We get to share those cultures and share those things that we wouldn't otherwise be, especially when we're just outside of Houston, one of the most diverse cities in America.
Right.
And I know that those folks who are not from around here are so grateful that there is a market that specializes to the things so that they can have a little taste of home.
Right.
When I meet people who are not from this area, especially from other countries, I always ask, what do you miss the most? Number one thing, they don't say family. They don't say music. They don't say government. They say the food.
Yeah.
Because if they can get some sort of, it's sort of kind of like theirs. It's not the
authentic
food they grew up with, right? It's not their neighbor's local restaurant and I mean, I could think the same. I mean, I love to travel, but there is something about Tex-Mex. I mean, that's what I want.
Yeah. And you go outside of Texas and get Mexican food. No way it's the same.
No,
I don't even do it.
It's usually not worth
just
it.
not the same.
Yeah. Well, what about, let me just jump into this. How might our physical health and our relationship with food and maybe even our lack of understanding of food, how does that affect our spiritual health? You mentioned that earlier about health being in a couple of different components. Do you see a connection?
I just see a connection between the psychology of food and how it helps you day to day. Because I know working with the crews, sending food to orbit, when there's going to be a special event while they're up there, whether it's somebody's birthday or a holiday, they're going to pack something special for each of those events. Yeah. They get to take a certain amount of preference food that they choose. The basic diet they have up there is a very varied diet, but it's a standard menu. They send the same products. They don't eat per menu, but they do get to take some preference food with them, and they use that preference food for things like, a lot of them will say, okay, if Christmas, one of the crew members will say, okay, I'm doing Christmas. He'll take one of his containers and pick a Christmas meal for the crew because, the psychology or the spirituality, if you want to, of the food and sharing the meal is so important on orbit, because, like I said, it's one of the few creature comforts they have, and, it provides them an opportunity. It's such a morale builder for the crew, and especially when you're talking about trying to build morale between Russian and American crew members and, European crew members all across the board, Yeah. So anything that binds them together and definitely mealtime does that, It's one of
those things that does connect all of humanity. Again, we have to eat, but every culture, food is such an essential piece. And it's almost like every culture, no matter where you live, no matter what language you speak, no matter what kind of government you live under, you gather for meals together. That is still such an important piece. And as I say that, I'm reminded there was an article I read last year, and it was talking about actually the decline of church. And an atheist wrote it and compared it to what would happen if we had no more sit-down restaurants. Like as we see the increase of DoorDash and to go and kind of, everyone, what kind of society doesn't have spaces where people can come to share meals together, even at separate tables, right? And that's kind of what the author of the article was saying, was like, even though that person didn't believe in God, believed that a society needed a space where people could come together and share that. Just like we need a space where we can come together and share meals out in the world. Now, of course, there's also this power of a meal in your home, right?
Well, family meals,
right.
yeah.
Still very powerful. And then I'm also thinking just how often Jesus chose to eat with people.
Yeah.
And how that was such a neutralizer, such a powerful invitation, even when he invited himself to their home. I will dine at your home tonight,
Right.
but this sharing a meal. And then let's go on to say it made some people upset. Why do you eat with sinners?
Right.
Why do you eat with Gentiles? What's wrong with you? Because the meal was such a sacred thing. And then Jesus breaks the mold and says, all are welcome here. This is sacred. This is holy. This is powerful. And I'm breaking the barriers and saying all can come.
And I don't think there's any accident that he chose bread and wine.
Yeah.
Because everybody can relate to food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even that, like that Last Supper, it was a holy meal. It was the Passover celebration of God's greatest liberation to that point, right?
Right.
And then this act that Jesus only continues and says, look, we've gathered together to remember this great act of liberation when God gave us our freedom from Egypt, sent us out into the wilderness and then into the Holy Land and started this whole new thing. And that was the greatest thing we'd ever seen. And we've continued to remember it every year. And now I'm going to do a new thing. I have a new promise for you. This liberation is not just for you. This meal we're sharing, you're to share it. Even with those who you might deem unclean, unworthy, unseen, even those who don't have the same heritage and ancestral line as you, they're welcome at this. And then, like you said, yeah, this bread you eat at every meal, not just this holy meal, that's me. That's me given to you, right? This wine, this cup that, again, you drink at almost every meal, especially special ones, that's me. Don't forget me. Remember me. Take it, receive it. Yeah, what a powerful thing that this coming together around a table can do. What happens when we miss it? What happens when we simply consume our food mindlessly without any recognition, notion, intention of both what it is and or what it can do? What happens?
I think there's a tendency that's where you get people overdoing it, consuming too much. I think that can be part of it. Because if you're not intentional, I've heard a lot of things about if you're trying to lose weight, you need to eat more slowly and be more intentional and more conscious of the flavors and what you're consuming. And, and I'm a real fast eater. Steve criticizes me all the time for how quickly I eat. And, I think that's problematic because if you're not intentional about it, it's like you don't notice. And so you don't feel the, if you eat slowly, you're gonna feel full, So the quicker you eat, the less chance you're gonna have to register the fullness of what you've consumed. And so it makes it easier to overdo if you eat real quickly and you're not intentional about what you're consuming.
Yeah. I use a weight loss app, Noom. I don't know if people are aware of that one.
I've heard of it.
Really, it's the psychology of food. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to break down and build new habits. And it talks a lot about fog eating. And this is my fog eating is while I'm cooking a healthy dinner, I am eating chips out of the bag for the whole 15 minutes that my delicious chicken breasts and grilled veggies are grilling. And I think to myself, I have no idea how many chips I ate. Also, I'm getting a little full and I don't even need all this food anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm not even thinking about it, right? Also, P.S., while I'm scrolling my phone, right? I'm not present in any of it. I don't know how much I'm eating. Yes, I'm enjoying the sensation of the crunch, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at my phone, right? And that's another thing Noom suggests is like quit eating with your phone, quit eating with a screen.
Quit eating in front of the TV. That's another. Yeah.
Because you don't even know
You don't pay
what
attention.
you're doing,
Right.
and you don't, like you said, get the intention. The other thing that this app, suggests, and a lot of them will do, is write down what you are eating. And you don't even have to modify it. Just writing it, the act of writing it down, you'll start to eat less. Because you'll start to be like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I have an app on my phone that tracks calories. And so, yeah. And it also, I have a watch that keeps track of my steps and so correlates calories into that app. And so I know when I'm, exceeding what I
Sure.
should for the day,
When
it's
you're-
like, yep, you're in the negative here, this is not good.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, just that intentionality. Because I would say the same thing. Just about it, again, let's keep it on food and God. If you're completely unaware of what you're eating, also if you're only eating processed food, always, you're never, taking a moment to enjoy what God has provided. If you're not recognizing, then you're missing that provision, right? Like I said,
Right.
for me, that's what I would suggest. Like if you're not taking the moment to be intentional and looking at your food as a way that God has provided for you, you're missing that. You're missing that blessing. You're missing that gift, right? Or if you're steering away from it and you won't eat a fresh vegetable for anything, frozen, okay, it's a step, we're taking steps here, progress. But if you're not eating real food, right? Food that God has given you, then you are going to miss out on that gift. And maybe if you're feeling alone, if you're feeling unseen by God, unloved, you're missing this place where God may be screaming at you, I gave you sweet potatoes. Like, look how much I love you, and being able to recognize that.
Yeah. But I'm also a firm believer, yes, in God's provision, but I'm also a firm believer that he has provided the knowledge that we have to preserve food and process food and, be able to make it last longer and, be more available to people around the world.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. How you can feed people in other places because of that provision as well. And then I would even say, if you're eating all your meals alone in front of a screen, you're also missing that community. You're missing that power of a shared meal, of that time together, And I used to be better at this, but like inviting people into my home and have a meal, it's such a powerful relationship catalyst even, much less, being able to continue. But even restaurants, and it doesn't have to be fancy. You can have a holy meal at Mickey D's, sit down and enjoy that together.
Right.
And so that opportunity too. And I usually utilize the gift of a lunch break because everyone's got to eat.
Right.
Right. As busy as you may be, I can usually pull people away. Well, can we meet for lunch? If all you got is 45 minutes, that's fine. Like, you take this time, and also take this time to breathe and realize the world's going to keep spinning. Even if I take a 50-minute lunch today, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Being able to stop and maybe not get so wrapped up.
Right. And food can be a stress reliever. And that's, like you're talking about now, stopping for lunch or stopping for dinner. It can be a stress reliever. And so that's important too. But it can also, because of that, it's also tempting to overdo it sometimes.
100.
Yeah.
100. Just last night, I found myself, I couldn't sleep and, didn't do the things I should have done to like calm my mind and calm my spirit. An hour later, my stomach started rumbling and I'm really tired at this point. Like, my eyes are about to fall, but I'm like, I should probably eat because I don't want to wake up hungry, I wake up hungry every day. That's why I eat breakfast. And so I convinced myself to stay up another hour and eat something I didn't need, but what I realized is it's not that it wasn't because I was hungry. I was longing, right? There was a hunger in me, but it wasn't for, I had pasta for dinner. I was fine, it was still with me. And so, but recognize like, oh, I'm wanting to eat because I have this longing in me and I feel like I can't fill it any other way. And so let me eat this, like it was horrible granola and yogurt, but it was extra calories that put me over. I didn't need it.
Yeah.
It was also really late at night, and but that happens to us, right? Like you said, it can be comforting. I think it's probably minimal, maybe or a temporary comfort or
Right.
a false comfort,
Right.
especially when that's not actually what we're hungry for.
Mm-hmm.
We can reach for that and sometimes use it, but unfortunately, we can find ourselves like, and this morning I woke up and I was like, why didn't I go pray? Why didn't I go read my Bible? Probably would have gave the Bible 10 minutes. I would have fallen right to sleep and I would have been fine. I mean, let's be honest. I was so tired, but had this longing in me that wouldn't let me go to sleep. And instead I looked at two different screens for 2 hours and ate junk food. It was just like, that didn't fill me. And guess what? I didn't sleep well, but being intentional, I can say, okay, let's not do that again. Let's realize that isn't actually healthy physically or spiritually. And so how to make that better choice, Yeah. We talked a little bit about Jesus and food and I'm curious, where have you encountered Christ or just this great divinity of God in the work that you've done, like in your, preparing these astronauts to go on this voyage, and as you dive into the molecular biology of food, like where are those moments where you're like, oh, there you are, God. That's so neat. And thanks for showing up. Or, do you have any of those kind of stories?
Well, I can't really say specifically that I do, but I think, God has provided so much knowledge to us to be able to manage food, to be able to grow it more effectively and more abundantly, to be able to protect it better in the field, from parasites and from, there's just so much knowledge that has been gained over time about how to handle food, how to package food, how to protect it, how to make it safer from a healthy perspective. That comes from God. I really feel like that comes from God. That's not, something that man may take credit for it, but, I really think that's intentional on God's part to make it possible for us to do those things. Because when you look back, the whole something like canning, you go back to the time before they really had effective canning, people died a lot from the food that they consumed because it was mishandled and not, properly cooked or properly processed. So, that's important. And I feel like God provided man that knowledge to be able to extend the shelf life and the safety of food.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is God is a giver, and that's what I think about this great creation that God created out of nothingness and then gave it to us so freely, knowing we would pollute our air,
mess it up,
ruin our sea, all this. And yet God still gave it to us. And,
as a scientist, evolution is real. I mean, there is evidence out there to support it, but I'm a firm believer that there was an author behind evolution and that this didn't happen by accident. There's not enough mutations or enough whatever over any amount of time for what we have here to have happened by accident. It's not by accident. It's by plan. It's by God's plan. Yeah. It probably didn't happen in 7 days, but but it was per God's plan.
Vickie, we getting wild up in here. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, I love when I talk to scientists who who tell me the exact same thing. I think science proves God over and over
Yes.
again. There is not this,
It
you know,
didn't
and
happen.
or, you know, it is.
didn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That there's gotta be this, and that there's so many examples of how there's gotta be a God. Look at this magnificence. Look at this creativity. Look at this innovation. Look at this evolution. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And why just here and not elsewhere? You know, I mean,
A whole nother one. Yeah.
that's a whole other show.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. I mean, that's the big question now. Like, is it only here? Where else? And why? And but even that, you know, we do know that this is, at least within our approachable location, this is the only place with this kind of life.
Right.
Right? This fully sustainable, if we would just take care of it, life, you know. And again, this gift that God is of a giver.
Right.
And back to Jesus and continually calling people to the table. It wasn't just come, but it was come and share.
Right.
Right. And continue to do this. And there's this piece where I think the more that we learn to give of our food and our resources so that others are not hungry, then we get to share with God, right? We get to share, because God doesn't even reserve God's own self from us, but instead pours that out too and says, there's nothing off limits to you. You can have all of me, even when you destroy the beautiful creation, even when you crucify. Like, that's not the end. And you get to continue to share it. And I'm not going to stop because you're not a good recipient. I'm going to keep on giving, right? And yeah, like if we could just think about food and, you know, we talk about health, our bodies, our brains, our minds, our spirits, that these are all gifts from God, that God is not going to stop providing and giving. Like, I already feel healthier. I already feel better. I already feel like I can do more and you know, be able to live with a little bit more happiness and glory and goodness when I can reframe it like that versus, you know, maybe feeling so stuck and hard and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I believe that was Jesus' intention for us, the church, the body, right? Continue to give. Continue to see God in everything. Continue to give it, right? Continue to learn more and more ways to give more and more. I mean, you know, back to, there is a benefit of processed food. Every food pantry is full of processed food because it stays.
Yeah.
And we can share that. You know, luckily you have some that do have freezers and can do some amazing things. Even that, the technology of a freezer.
Yeah.
That's a gift from God.
Sure it is.
I'm so grateful.
And, you know, especially when you go to other countries where they don't have that as readily available, you know. So you can appreciate what a gift it is to be able to do that. Because there's plenty of places that don't have that available. Yeah. And even when you go to Europe, they don't have the volume of freezers and refrigerators in the typical home there that we have here. It's a very different. And so you go in their grocery stores, there's a lot more shelf-stable food, and that's because they don't have the extensive refrigerators and freezers. Most of them don't, that we have here.
Well, and even countries with really harsh winters, they're like, I'm not getting out and going to the store.
Yeah,
you know? Like,
exactly.
This stuff's got to last all winter.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where, again, like you said, you get into like the potatoes and the onions and the stuff that can stand, carrots, you know, these things that can withstand.
And can grow in those climates.
And can even grow.
Yeah.
And again, look at God's provision.
Yeah.
You got 12 inches of snow on the ground. That's not a problem. Don't worry about it. I got you.
Yeah.
Take this up, cut it up, put it in some oil. You can make some delicious French fries. You're good.
I mean, I have a real hard time with, as wealthy as this country is, that we have people that go hungry in this country. I mean, that just, to me, that seems inexcusable because we have such an abundance. And you look at, and food waste is huge. I mean, you look at the food industry, and that's, you know, my professional organization is the Institute of Food Technologists. And one of the things that they talk about all the time is how to reduce food waste. And companies talk about how to recycle food, you know, into other useful things, whether it's animal feed or whatever, because there is so much food waste in this country. And that's why, to me, it's very sad that we have people that go to bed hungry in this country. Yeah.
In the city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that God has put that on your heart for a reason, right? With your brain and your experience, and even that group of people who have studied this, like, hey, let's get on this problem.
Mm-hmm.
How do we take care of it? We have plenty. I was doing a puzzle and I was like frustrated because I, can't find it. And then I paused for a second and I was like, come on, Thea, you have all the answers in front of you. And as I said that to myself, I was like, I feel like that's probably what God says to me all the time. Come on, Thea. You have all the answers in front of you. You just got to figure them out.
Yeah.
And this beautiful gift of community where, okay, maybe I probably can't do it all alone, but if I would ask a few people, if I would talk, if I would join forces, if we would collaborate, we could take care of this.
Yeah.
And
that's where you get the food banks and
Yeah. Yeah, I'm partnering with Christian Helping Hands, which is where our church is partnered. I mean, I think it's one of the most fantastic organizations in Pearland. I think they're doing such great work. And I can't help but dream of like, how do we do more?
Yeah.
How do we serve on Saturday? How do we offer a warm meal? How do we give out sandwich packages? Like, how do you do this?
Yeah. So they did a story on the Houston News about Christian Helping Hands because the shelves were empty after the holidays. And so they did a show. And so Steve and I went and took some food over there. We went to the grocery store and took some food. And, it just really breaks my heart that the shelves were so bare. But at the same time, I was thinking, they don't have what they really need. I'm not an IT person, but what they really need is a website where people can donate money. Yeah. They don't have that now. They don't even have a website from what they've told me. And so, if somebody with that talent could partner with them, that would be great because I think if they had a way for people to go online and donate cash to help them, that would be really good. And I was totally unaware of the medical clinic that they have next door. And that's an amazing thing. And Steve was unaware of it and was thrilled to hear that it exists, because of his background as a physician. So, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. There's one of those places of, hey, if we don't know the need, we can't fill it. And sometimes I'm baffled by our society today that is so technologically connected. And yet we're still so disconnected.
Oh, yeah. Even more so because of all the, it's, so much is electronic, the communication now, rather than, and that's why I love the commercial that they have on TV right now. And I don't even remember what the product is for. I just remember the commercial where it has people really talking. And it says, it's good to hear your voice rather than just a text, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Power of a phone call. That archaic thing from, last century. It's still pretty powerful.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Well, if you're listening and you have website design experience, contact Christian Helping Hands. They could use your help. They just need a landing page that says you can donate money here. Connect that to a PayPal and let's get them supported. So I totally hear you. We have too much for people to have too little.
Right.
And so, here he is. God's providing a way for us to share that message. And isn't that what we're to do as the body, is to share everything that we have. I do want to pivot for just a second. I want you to talk about your book. I'll let you introduce it. You tell me all about it.
Okay. So I wrote a book about my career. It's called Space Bites, Reflections of a NASA Food Scientist. It was published in December of 2023 by Ballast Books, like a ship's ballast. And I wrote it for several reasons. One, right before, I wrote most of it during COVID, about 90% of it during COVID, during the lockdown. And whenever, we were all staying home. And my mentor at NASA and my first boss, he had passed away in the fall of 19. And I thought it would be nice to write a book and dedicated to him, you know. And then when the lockdown hit and we were staying at home, I thought,
God
if
provided.
I'm ever going to do this, now's the time. So I did about 70% or 90% of it during the lockdown. But I also wrote it to make students aware of food science as a degree path. A lot of students are aware of culinary and being a chef. They're aware of dietetics and being a dietitian, but not that many are really aware of food science. And there's a big demand out there for food scientists. And food scientists are the people that develop those new products that you see in the store. Anytime there's a new product on the shelf, there's going to be one or more food scientists behind that. They're responsible for food safety at production facilities. So they do food safety. They work for USDA and FDA to protect your meats, your vegetables, everything, all the food processing. They run the good manufacturing plants, practices in the food plants and everything. So there's a real demand out there, and most people aren't aware of it. I stumbled onto it as an undergraduate. My last semester at A&M, I was 1 hour short of micro elective. And on the list was a food micro course over in the College of Ag. And so I went to my advisor and I said, I want to take it. And he said, why? You're just 1 hour short. That's a 4-hour course with a lab and all that. But that's how I ended up going into food science for my graduate work, because I got very interested in the application of micro to the processing and preservation of food. Yeah. And so that was one reason I wrote the book, was to make students aware. In fact, any profits that I make from the book are going to go to food science scholarships, both through A&M and through my professional org, because they have a foundation that does scholarships as well.
That's fantastic. I love hearing just, again, how God provided that divine inspiration to take this one little class that you didn't need, and it led you. Yeah. And I love also hearing this reminder of this is a career path. This is something that we probably will continue to only need more of. And what a place where one could take their faith of knowing God provides everything, and that God would give us this amazing brain and power of knowledge and wisdom and experiment to sustain, right? To sustain the food, to sustain the nutrients. I mean, I would love to see us being able to make processed food more nutritious, and to maintain that, because as someone who does try to eat certain diet, on the go is really, really hard. Like, I can't eat a sandwich. I don't eat bread. I don't eat that. So like I'm usually having to have something in a package for long form. Then it's just, all I got is a bar, some dried dates and nuts. It's delicious. It's nuts and give me everything I need, right? So I would love to see that kind of stuff. And as we just recognize and realize that we're getting less and less farms, we're getting more and more urban. Right. We're going to need processed food, but we're going to need it to be nutritious. Yes.
And that's a big push. I can tell you through my professional org that, companies are working very hard to try to figure out ways to make processed food better. Yeah. Yeah. Because, and they know so much more now about what the problems with processed food are, and, trying to correct those and find ways to still get the quality and the safety of the food, but yet making it more, healthier. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to see us too, where processed food could be even more communal too, because individual packaging suggests individual eating, right? And so how do you create, and I'll say, just as a working woman and wanting to have more people in my home, I don't have the energy to also do even a 1 hour meal that takes time, and so I'm like, but I found these HEB sheet pan meals, which it's just frozen vegetables and chicken. And I'm like, great. They don't taste delicious, but they are working in a pinch. You know what I mean? And so like, I love to see that too. How do we help create more community out of these foods that also sustain and take into that account that convenience factor and that ease factor, which we're all needing as our lives get more and more busy. Yes. So, Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for being willing to share. Thank you for this honest conversation about food and health and where we see God in the midst of it and where God might be calling. How can people contact you? How can they find your book? What's the best way to?
Well, actually, I have a website. It's vickiekloeris.org, or .com, sorry, vickiekloeris.com. And the book is actually on Ballast Books website. So if you go to ballastbooks.com and look at their library, it's also on Amazon and it's also on Barnes & Noble as well. But if you buy it from the publisher, I get more money for scholarships.
Good job, Vickie. Good job.
Because Amazon takes a big cut.
Of course. Of course. Yes. We'll make sure that those links are in our show notes. And I would love to hear from you, listeners. What are your thoughts on food and God and health? What are your thoughts, just period? We'd love to hear your comments, your ideas, your feedback. You can email those directly to me at theac, THEAC, at fumcpearland.org. That link will also be available in the show notes. And we'd love to just kind of get some feedback and hear your comments. We'll read them on the show and talk through and maybe spur even a whole nother conversation. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to Real Talk, FUMC Pearland podcast. We're here to have real conversations with real people, and we invite you into that conversation as well. We do meet on Sundays at 10:45 and 8:30, both traditional and contemporary services, and you can check us out on our website, fumcpearland.org, for the latest list of events and ways that you can get connected to. Thanks for joining in. We'll see you next time. Real Talk Podcast is produced by First United Methodist Church Pearland in collaboration with Pearland Podcast Studios, recorded here in Pearland, Texas. We invite you to check out our website at fumcpearland.org to check out additional events and opportunities for you to engage in real talk about faith and relationships.